Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, Open University.
A very good morning to all the listeners of this online video programs. This is from the Chaitanya studio of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University. Myself, Dilip Barad from Maharaja Krishna Kumar Singh Ji, Bhavnagar University. Today I'm going to deal with the topic in literary theory and criticism. And this topic is related to Sir Philip Sidney and his famous work Defense of Poesy, or known as An Apology for Poetry, which was published in during Renaissance time in 1595. About the author, the Sir Philip Sidney, who lived between 1554 and 1586, was an English poet, courtier, scholar, and soldier who is remembered as one of the most prominent figures of the Elizabethan age. His works include a sonnet sequence, Astrophel and Stella, a treatise, The Defense of Poesy, as we just have mentioned it, also known as The Defense of Poesy or An Apology for Poetry, and a pastoral romance, The Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia. In this paper on literary theory and criticism, we are not going to see Sir Philip Sidney as a poet, but we are going to see him as a critic, the first prominent critic of English language. We have to see the series of English critics in the subsequent times, but so far as Renaissance time is concerned, Elizabethan time is concerned, perhaps there was not a single prominent voice in critical theories or in the criticism of either English literature or literature as such. You might have studied various critics. Maybe you might have started with Aristotle or Plato, Plato's objection to poetry, Aristotle's defense to that, and his ideas in poetics about tragedy. You might have also studied Longinus and other critics, but they were Greek critics. They were not English or European as such in the modern European languages, but they were Greek, writing in Greek language, or there were many in the Latin language. So here, from that time onwards, down the line, after 1500 long years, we have one voice in literary theory and criticism, which is heard first time in English language, in form of Sir Philip Sidney in 1595. So that is this essay, A Defense of a Poesy. So genre-wise, it is the first work of literary criticism in English. The form of this writing is prose, with some portions of verse cited as examples here. The context of writing this, what was the context? Normally, there is some reasons that critics would come in defense of literature. Like Plato objected to literature, and so there was need for Aristotle to make a defense of literature as such. So here also there was similar kind of case. In 1579, Stephen Gosson published a pamphlet titled The School of Abuse, describing and decrying the immorality of English playhouse and English poetry. Although Gosson dedicated his tract to the right noble gentleman, Master Philip Sidney, the pamphlet appears to have irritated rather than flattered its intended patron, for it was around this time that Sidney almost certainly began working on his Apology for Poetry. So, though that tract written by Stephen Gosson, who is criticizing the kind of literature that is written during those time in 1579, though he addressed this to patron Sir Philip Sidney, but it doesn't seem that he was happy with this writing or this way of looking at literature. And probably he wanted to give answer to Stephen Gosson, and so he wrote Apology for Poetry, or in defense of poesy. Sidney clearly had been contemplating the problem of the poet's role in society for a long time, perhaps since his earliest education, in which he would have encountered Plato's famous banishment of poets from the ideal republic on the grounds that they could lead the guardians and citizens to immorality. The very famous objection which Plato raised against poets, and he wanted to banish all the poets from his republic. Maybe that was in the mind. He also wanted to write in as an answer to that also. In the defense, Sidney argues that poets were the first philosophers, that they first brought learning to humanity, and that they have the power to conceive new worlds of being and to populate them with new creatures, the imaginary creatures, more beautiful than the real world, perhaps. So, Sidney argued by prominently in this essay that poets were the first philosophers. See, Plato's argument was that philosophers speak truth and poets are liars because their imaginary work is twice or thrice removed from reality. So they are basically liars, so they copy the truth, they imitate the truth, and whatever is copied or imitated is not as good as original. And so Plato's way of looking at poets was not with self-respect or any kind of dignity also. That is why Sidney says that poets are philosophers. They are the first philosophers. Aristotle also had said the similar kind of things. And here we will see in subsequent arguments which are given by Sir Philip Sidney in defense of poetry, that to a greater extent he is reiterating what Aristotle had said. So he is somehow repeating many of the things which were already said by Aristotle in defense of literature, tragedy, as against Plato's objections. According to Sidney, their golden world, a poet's golden world of possibility is superior to the brazen one of historians who must be content with the mere truth of happenstance. Plato also referred to historians. Aristotle also brought in historians in the arguments. And Aristotle very prominently said that historians write what is or what was. But literature or the poets write what ought to be. And this what ought to be is more superior than what is or what was. It is more profound historical truth, or it is even much deeper and poignant philosophical truth also. Almost similar thing is repeated here, but in a different words. He uses the word like golden and brazen here. He then defines what he believes to be the essential formal characteristics of the various genres of poetry, and defends poetry against the charge that it is composed of lies and leads one to sin. So he defines that, he believes that to be the essential formal characteristics of the various genres of poetry, and defends poetry against the charge that it is composed of lies and leads one to sin. Again, this was the charge that Plato levied, and Stephen Gosson also referred to the similar kinds of sinful activities which might be inspired among the people through literature. We know even today that these arguments are quite valid in our times also. At the end of the presentation, we'll try to connect with today also. He says, I quote, "The lawyer saith what men have determined, the historian what men have done, the grammarian speaketh only of the rules of speech, and the rhetorician and logician, considering what in nature will soonest persuade, thereon give artificial rules. He brings in other professionals like lawyers, grammarians, historians, logicians, rhetoricians, and he says that, well, they all give artificial rules. So their truth is more artificial, more imitated one than that of the poets. Only the poet, Sidney writes, only the poet, disdaining to be tied to any such subjection, lifted up with the vigor of his own invention, doth grow in effect another nature, in making things either better than nature bringeth forth, or quite anew, forms such as never were in nature. So, as he goeth hand in hand with nature, not enclosed within the narrow warrants of her gifts, but freely ranging only within the zodiac of his own wit. So, poet is much freer than any boundaries or bondages of the discipline. He is free to go beyond all the boundaries and borders. Today, when people talk about interdisciplinarity of literature or the importance of interdisciplinarity, well, perhaps Sidney was striking something at this, that lawyers, grammarians, historians, rhetoricians, logicians, they have their limits within which they have to think. Philosophers have their limits within which they have to make their discourse. But poets are without any those limits. They freely range across the zodiacs. He refers in that way. Nature never set forth the earth in so rich tapestry as diverse poets have done. Her world is brazen, nature's world is brazen. The poet's only deliver is a golden. So he goes rhetorically, rather we can say, or a kind of a defense of the poets, that even the natural world is brazen world. Poet adds colors to it. It is the poet who makes the brazen world golden. The poet's world, the reality which is portrayed by poet is far better, more beautiful, more lovable, livable than that of nature also. So Sir Philip Sidney, somewhere it seems he is a little bit extending his defense for the poets to such an extent that he even says that they are better than the natural world also. He says further in the essay, poetry is an art of imitation, for so Aristotle termeth it in the word mimesis, that is to say, a representing, counterfeiting, or figuring forth, to speak metaphorically, a speaking picture with this end to teach and delight. We have seen most of the critics are always preoccupied with the idea of nature of literature and function of literature. So, if for Plato the function of literature was not good in the Republic, in an utopian society, for Aristotle it was very good, it was very important, and the cathartic effect of literature would make humans better than they are. It was ennobling according to Aristotle. So the function of tragedy was to make people better, humans better, through the purgation of the excess of emotions and feelings. Even after Sidney, when Dryden will come and Dryden will write the essay on dramatic poesy, at that time he also will think of the nature and function of the play. And again he also will come that what is the end of literature? What is the end, objective, aim of literature also? Well, here Sidney, recalling what Aristotle has said, he says that, well, it is representing, counterfeiting, it is not mere imitation, but it is mimetic by nature, which Plato also said, and Aristotle agreed with that idea, that literature imitates life. It is a mirror image of life. It is the representation of life, of human nature, of human beings as such. But then he says poetry is a speaking picture. It is a speaking picture. As there is a world is a picture, then poetry through the words is speaking picture. Quite an interesting imagery Sidney has given here. And what is the end of this speaking picture? The end of this speaking picture, that is poetry, is to teach and delight. So, for Plato, who wanted literature to only teach what is right and wrong, as philosophy is bound to do, Aristotle said that teaching is the byproduct, delight, or let us say aesthetic delight, which can be sorrowful also. That's why tragedies are aesthetically more delightful at times than comedies, because it is not to just entertain oneself. This delight is not limited to the idea of mere entertainment. It is aesthetic delight, wherein the sorrowful delight is more poignant, more deeper, better experienced by the people than that of the happy experiences. So he says to teach and delight both are very important function of poetry. To continue with what he further said in the essay, I quote, "It is not rhyming and versing that maketh a poet, but it is that feigning of notable images of virtues, vices, or what else, with that delightful teaching, which must be the right describing not to know a poet by." Again, he is striking something so significant that even after him, when Wordsworth, Coleridge, the poet critics will come in the Romantic era, they also will have to say something about this. Aristotle also has said something about the rhyming lines in poetry. So here he says that it is not rhyming lines, it is not verses, versification that maketh a poet. Coleridge also has said, or Wordsworth also, that even the nursery rhymes have a rhythm and a verse. If I say, "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are, up above there so high, like a diamond in the sky." Well, it has a beautiful rhyme. It is a nature poem. But can it be equated with romantic nature poetry? Perhaps no, because it doesn't have something very significant which only rhyming or versing can give to poet. So if there are good poets who can adjust the word in the rhyming scheme, can they become a good poet? Well, if we ask Sidney will say no. It doesn't make it a poet. But it is that feigning of notable images of virtues, vices, or what else with that delightful teaching. It is something wonderful that those images of vices and virtues, the way poet can see and the way poet can bring in into the poetry, that one gets delightful teaching. Well, again, now you can say delight is at the upper hand, and then subsequently there is some kind of teaching also that makes the poet. So poet is not made by rhyming lines, but somewhere he is bringing in the notable images of virtues and vices, and along with that some other things also, which also gives delightful teaching. To further his essay and to have a look at some important lines where he again recalls Aristotle and writes this, I quote, "As Aristotle saith, it is not gnosis but praxis must be the fruit of teaching, and how praxis can be without being moved to practice, it is not hard matter to consider." So it is not only talking about mystical things, talking about idealisms that matters, but what matters is into practice. What is the praxis of the things? maybe this is an answer to Plato also, or anybody who thinks in ideal terms about world and life, maybe Stephen Gosson also, that what is good, what is ideal, what philosophy thinks about right, wrong, these are ideals. The real world is far away from those ideals, and literature deals with the real life situations, wherein whatever we believe as right is finding a very interesting conflict with the world. And then we have to rethink about our rights. The ideals are rethought in practical world. Maybe that is where praxis becomes something significant. The philosopher showeth you the way, but this to no man, but to him that will read him, and read him with attentive, studious painfulness. Now, therein at all sciences, in our poet, the monarch, for he doth not only show the way, but giveth so sweet a prospect to the way as will entice any man to enter into it. Well, if I have to simplify it and would like to explain this in a much simpler term, then I would say that it is like a pill, medicinal pill. And when we think of the medicinal pill, which is sugar coated, so we swallow the sugar coated pill, and then in the stomach it dissolves, and that the benefits of that, the bitter part of the pill is being absorbed by our body. But while it is passing through the tract of our tongue, where we have the glands to test the sweetness, at the time it looks very sweet, and then the benefits of the bitter part of the pill we get. So philosophy is something very bitter, and even the very first test of philosophy is so bitter. It is studious painfulness. To read philosophy and to grab ideas about life from philosophy is full of studious painfulness. What literature does, or what poet does, is picks up those gems from philosophy, converts it into a beautiful story, and then it is given to the people. So people lovingly come to poets, to literature, to grab those things, to swallow those things, those sweet aspects they enjoy, and then the delightful teaching plays its vital role in making humans in society the better people, better place for everybody also. So that is what he says in comparison between philosopher and the literary writer. I quote again from his essay, "The poet he nothing affirms, and therefore never lieth. For as I take it, to lie is to affirm that to be true which is false." Now, this is an answer to the question that Plato raised, that poets are liars. They lie. They are in the seventh sky, always far away from the reality of the world. So, most of their work is full of lies, completely imaginary work, nothing to do with the reality. Well, Sidney's argument here is that poet never affirms. The poet never says that herein I speak the truth. Herein I speak the truth. Never ever poet says that. Poet always says that, well, this is my pure imagination. If you find truth in it, it is all yours. It is all yours if you find truth in it. It is not mine. Mine is pure imagination. So when somebody is not telling that I am speaking truth, how can we say that the person is a liar? If somebody promises in the court that whatever I will say, I will speak truth and I will speak nothing but the truth, and then if the person speaks something that is not true, then we can say you are a liar. But well, poets never claim that we are truth sayer. We are maybe soothsayer, but never truth sayer. There. So that's why he says that, for as I take it, to lie is to affirm that to be true, which is false. But well, poets never affirm, so they never lie. So as the other artist, and especially the historian, affirming many things, can in the cloudy knowledge of mankind hardly escape from lies. Historian says what is, what was. Historians say with guarantee that this is the truth. With the advancement of historiography today, down the line after 500, 700 years ahead of where Sir Philip Sidney was, we know that historiographer or historiography itself is also something where there are lots of interpretations based on the evidence available to the historian. So now, as per the current historiography, historians also will say that we make statements based on the evidences which are provided to us and whatever tools are there to interpret those evidences. So today even the historians never claim the truth on the past events. But well, in those years, perhaps historians were considered truth speakers. But the poet, as I said before, never affirmeth. So wise readers of poetry will never give the lie to things not affirmatively but allegorically and figuratively written. So poets' truths are allegorical truths. Poets' truths are figurative truths, and the readers of poetry are well aware that how are they going to read the language of poetry. They are not going to take it word for word. They are not going to take it very much as the dictionary meanings are there, but they will try to see the difference between connotative meaning, the denotative meaning, and the context in which it is said, and then what are the allegories and what are the figures of speeches which are used by writing the poetry there. To further his other observation about poetry was that poetry is the companion of camps. Sidney was soldier also. So being a soldier, the camps, that is the military camps, the soldiers who fight on the border. So for the soldiers, poetry was one of the best companions with them on the trenches when they lie and they fight there. When we come back again to come down to the 20th century, First World War, and we have so many war poets who would agree with this idea that poetry is the companion of trenches or camps for the soldiers. But our comedians think there is no delight without laughter, which is very wrong. For though laughter may come with delight, yet cometh it not of delight. Delight hath a joy in it, either permanent or present. Laughter hath only a scornful tickling. So it tries to, like, this is again a very interesting point, which we see that in the Western poetics, tragedy is in a way respected more than comedies. The comedy also is a very difficult art. But maybe we do not have a kind of a work like poetics, which is all about tragedy. There is no such work, classical work on comedy. And so somehow the people have believed that tragedy is a better form of art than comedy. Maybe in the same context here, Sidney also is making this reference that comedians or delight or laughter, that delight is not the delight which literature tend to give. The laughter can be scornful tickling also, because even satire generates laughter. For many, satire may not be considered as such a good form of art also. So delight hath different kind of a joy, wherein, as we said earlier, our sorrows are also joyful. There is happiness in telling the sad songs also. Sweetest are our songs, as P.B. Shelley has written, which tells about our sorrows and suffering. Maybe that is the reference which Sir Philip Sidney also brings here, that mere laughter is not what he meant by the idea of delight that comes from poetry or literature. Sidney responds in apology to an emerging antipathy to poetry that is displayed in works like Stephen Gosson's The School of Abuse, that kind of a Puritan attack on imaginative literature. As we started seeing this, that the Puritan attack, and we know that when the Puritans came in the power in 1640s up till 1660s, even theatres were shut down officially in England. An apology for poetry is the most important contribution to Renaissance literary theory. We get a very interesting voice to know that how critically somebody was thinking about literature. Sidney advocates a place for poetry within the framework of an aristocratic state while showing concern for both literary and national identity. What is at stake in Sidney's argument is a defense of poetry's nobility. The significance of the nobility of poetry is its power to move readers to virtuous action, to transport people, to transform people, to move people towards sublimity. Longinus also comes in our mind when we refer poetry has a power to move people to virtuous actions. True poets must teach and delight. That is how he tend to say that. And so before we end the thing, we come to this point that time and again there had been various attacks on literature, be it Plato's attack or Stephen Gosson's attack, or when dramatic poesy is written, there is another attack on the English play as compared to the French plays, and Dryden has to answer to that. When Wordsworth's poetry is attacked, Coleridge has to give an answer in Biographia Literaria for the same also. And there was very strong attack against the entire dramatic tradition in England from the Puritan rule, which went on happening throughout the centuries. Even when the Comedy of Manners were written, there were voices against Comedy of Manners also for its a kind of a behavior which they were showing on the stage, licentious kind of a behavior there. And every time we have seen that, well, somehow somebody came to give an appropriate defense to literature and art, and somebody was always there to stand for literature, to defend literature, and tell again and again that without literature, perhaps humans can't survive. Our existence depends on literature, and we need literature. If there are a few writers who might be problematic, but that doesn't mean that one should banish all the poets or to stop the entire dramatic tradition, or to nowadays troll filmmakers or writers in such a way that they officially announce that I commit suicide as a writer and I stop writing. So this is again every time, like perhaps there will be any time where writers were not attacked. We have in Victorian times also, Hardy was attacked for writing Tess of D'Urbervilles, Jude the Obscure also. And then D.H. Lawrence was also attacked. Lady Chatterley's lover was also dragged into court cases in different countries. Saadat Hasan Manto also has faced the similar kinds of court cases in India and then in Pakistan. Partition time and 1950s around that. Even famous painters like Raja Ravi Verma has also undergone the similar kinds of criticism during British England. So there is a very interesting trend, and nowadays also we find that many times people come to boycott Bollywood. Nowadays we have this hashtag boycott Bollywood. And so cancel culture, we live in a kind of what we call it hashtag cancel culture. Now this is if we recall T.S. Eliot, who has said in the Westland that nothing happens first time, everything is repeated. It is our amnesia that we feel that this is happening first time, but otherwise it always has a history of something. Never ever things happen first time. It is always something that is repeated from the past. The only thing is that we have perhaps forgotten, and it has happened to remind us again. So even in our times also we need defenses. We know Aristotle we require. We require the voice of Sir Philip Sidney in our time also. We want Dryden also in our time. We want people like Coleridge who would defend Wordsworth, even if they may not be agreeing with the same style of writing there. And so time and again, this voice is a very important voice, and that's how what we keep today in 21st century from a small message, a small essay written by Sir Philip Sidney in 16th century, after say 600 years. If there is something that is worth keeping today also, is that such voices are very important voices. The defense for literature will always be in demand. As the attackers on literature will be there, so will be there the demand for the defenders of literature also. So in this way, we keep we keep Sir Philip Sidney with us in this context also. And so that was an overview of Defense of Poesy and Apology for Poetry, written in 1595 by a very gentleman, Sir Philip Sidney, who lived between 54 and 86. Thank you, everybody. I hope you got the idea about what Sidney said then and what is the relevance of that in today's time also. Thank you, everybody.
स्वाध्यायः